Welcome to If Prices Could Talk, the podcast where we dive into the art and science of pricing, sales, and negotiation. I'm your host, Tracy Dent. Join me as we explore strategies and current events shaping the future of pricing power in B2B, featuring insights from industry leaders and subject matter experts. Let's jump into today's conversation. Let's start by, first of all, Josh and Brian, thank you for being here. Welcome to the podcast. Great to have you both on. I think a good starting place, Josh, if you would take us through your role and what IDverse does, and we'll use that as a jumping off point.
Okay, no problem. Chief Operating Officer of IDverse. IDverse is a digital identity verification technology group, established about 8 years ago. I first met the team, the founders and CEO, founders Matt and Dan, two amazing young people, very, very smart, intelligent guys, and John, the CEO, which they sought out to help them set up and run a business. And John's an amazing CEO and run and started many, many businesses. So I first met them when I was at Equifax, and I was running the Bureau Fraud and Identity for Equifax Australia. And I negotiated an agreement with IDverse and Equifax was sort of their first multinational customer back then, which sort of leads up to a story we'll talk about later on. But so joined them after we successfully sold Yellowfin. I joined Yellowfin in 2020, just before COVID started, and headed off to Japan, Seattle, Boise, San Francisco, back into Japan just as the pandemic was hitting its peak, and just managed to sneak back into Australia before the borders got locked down. We sold Yellowfin and we introduced Holden all through Yellowfin and had immense success there with that approach. We sold that a couple of years later, and then I joined as COO at IDverse, which we recently successfully sold to LexisNexis.
My thought for kind of our opening conversation, because you've both in different ways, worked with sales teams for a long time. And one of the focus points of our conversation is going to be around negotiations and how people are navigating them over the years, how it works across culture. And I think a good starting place is, how have you seen things? It's like, how are things staying the same in negotiations over the last 5-10 years, and where are things changing?
I think the things that stay the same is obviously understanding and appreciating your client's requirements and needs, and having a strong, trusting relationship at the beginning of that, and knowing who the people are within the business to navigate. The second thing I find, once the team's established that, is then proving the value of our solution out to the business, and having a strong understanding of the value that we can provide. And from there, you sort of have a very strong platform to then negotiate and go through the various tactics that the customer's going to throw against us. If I see teams going in that don't feel they have a strong position, or they haven't positioned it well, then I watch them get negotiated back quite quickly. So I think that's probably been the same. In the software world, in different regions, I've seen in the UK a propensity to not want to pay for things like support and maintenance and hosting fees, whereas in other regions there's an appreciation for that need. And I know that we've said before in correspondence with Holden's, about procurement's number one job is to ensure supply, and support and maintenance is certainly one of those areas that ensures supply. So in some markets, it's not even questioned, and they tend to go after the transactional fees. Other markets, they just suggest they're not going to pay for it. And that's particularly in gaming and wagering, I find, through UK and Europe.
Oh, that's interesting. So Tracy, from my perspective, certainly in terms of the way things are staying the same, I'm in lockstep with Josh, see the same things. One thing I'll double down on that is the same is, Josh just mentioned value and communicating your value. The one thing that I remain seeing as a challenge and yet is super important is communicating your value throughout your relationship with the customer. So one, don't just talk to one person, talk to it around the organization. And two, if you're showing up to communicate your value once they've issued an RFP, a request for proposal, it's too late. And really it needs to be part of QBRs or continuous conversation with folks that not only are you sharing your value, but you're checking in. Is the customer feeling the value that you think you are delivering? And that's a great place to get feedback and adjust if you need to. And then certainly, as Josh said, those tactics, they're the same procurement tactics that they were 10 years ago. Remarkably, the one thing I see different is the phrasing, "I'm disappointed." Like Josh, you're selling to me and you've delivered all this value, and I, as the procurement person, say to you, "I thought we were partners, Josh, but this pricing is just so high. I'm disappointed in you." And it's like playing on the heartstrings of these salespeople who are great relationship builders. So I see that as a big change. And then also, Tracy, it's around inflation, and now we're sort of in the midst of tariffs as well. How to handle those, how to pass along tariffs, how the buyer is accepting of some costs but not accepting of others, like Josh is pointing out. So that's a new wrinkle as well.
Yeah. Have you seen that start to play out across international markets? I mean, it's been only a few weeks, but it feels like so much has happened just in terms of that coming up as a topic, Josh.
Look, it's like a yo-yo at the moment, I guess. It's
Yeah.
on, it's on, it's off. So I haven't yet really felt the difference in our space. I know it's a big issue for us here in Australia for various reasons, and saw a couple of the senators going into bat for us, which was interesting because I believe we're in surplus with this. So I'm not sure why we're copying a tariff. There's a little bit of interesting information on a couple of our different industries, but yeah, that's going to be interesting how that plays out, particularly now owned by an American business as well. So how we sort of navigate that. Very early days. So it's not something yet that's impacted us, but it'd be interesting to see how that plays out. I guess I'd like to know, now that we're owned by an American company, are we effectively considered an American product? I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And Josh, you do, I mean, a lot of it is information, data, financial services, those sorts of things. How do you see tariffs playing out? It's not like you're buying car parts from another country and then trying to assemble it in Detroit or something.
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting component. I'm not really sure how it's going to affect us. We would deploy, particularly for the US, we would deploy in an Amazon Web Services environment in the US. The system is set up there, the professional services is set up, the software will be sold from there. So, you know, how that plays out, that the money would be staying there as well. It's not going to be transferring back. So, interesting circumstance. It may not affect us directly. Interesting to see how that plays out. When we sell in Europe, across Asia, Australia Pacific, you know, that could, I guess that's not really caught up in that side of things. So it'll be interesting. We're selling out of each region. We're selling in the US, we're selling out of the UK and Europe, we're selling out of Australia into Asia. So I'm not sure how that's going to affect us.
Yeah, that'll be interesting.
Well, in the type of work that you do at the company, Josh, there must be a lot of so we talk about, obviously, with quantifying value, there's revenue, there's cost, and then there's risk. And there's probably a lot in the mitigating risk category that you quantify with the team. Can you talk to us about that a bit?
Yes, certainly. So predominantly what we do as a technology is we validate and verify people's identity. So we will take your documentation, government issued documentation. We will validate and confirm the documentation is authentic. We will extract the information off that and pre-populate whatever application people are using, such as a mortgage application. We will then do a live selfie, short video, and this is all via your mobile phone securely. And through that process, we are then ensuring that you are live and present. And we're also matching your biometric against the image on your document. So that enables us to achieve proof and validation that you are who you say you are and you match your credentials and your credentials are correct. So with that information, you are then able to meet various types of compliance, not on its own, but in conjunction with other elements, things like know your customer compliance, anti-money laundering, counter-terrorism funding, PEPs and sanction checks. So it is the beginning of establishing the highest level of trust with an organization that you're about to do business with. Or if you're coming back and you're an existing customer, through a quick selfie type process, again, going back to our core components, proving again very quickly that you are who you say you are and live and present. And then I can get access to services via call centers or on the app. I might change my PII information, so information about myself, mobile phone numbers, email addresses, and so forth, that often start as in a fraudulent situation when people get through the process and haven't confirmed their identity. That's the beginning of an account takeover. So in that circumstance, we do a couple of things. One, we are helping organizations meet compliance, and that's highly important and regulated. The second thing we're doing is preventing fraud and preventing fraud on an ongoing basis. So our value proposition is twofold. One, we are ensuring that you're meeting your compliance and establishing that highest level of trust. And then second component to our value proposition is we are preventing fraud, which you then have a monetized ROI component to that as well. Mm-hmm. So we have an example here, a very good customer that was one of the GE Money franchises renames down here in Australia. And they've been using us for a while now. And their fraud prevention is sort of $15,000 per incident. And as we know from the LexisNexis fraud report, there's a 4 times impact to recover losses. So 15 times 4 is effectively what the impact would be for them. And we are saving them millions and millions and millions of dollars in that circumstance. So meeting the compliance from a KYC point of view, and then helping them to remove and mitigate substantial fraud from their business.
Yeah, that's great. So that part in terms of quantifying value is relatively simple in terms of the math that you just did, Josh. How do you think about the value of like minimizing risk where it's not a 1-to-1 ratio of you will be fined for this, like maybe it's reputational risk or something like that? How do you get your customers' heads around that sort of value that you provide?
Yeah, that's a great question. In a couple of different industries where perhaps they don't necessarily have the compliance requirements, let's say an online e-commerce business that's signing up customers. There was a recent business that sold for many hundreds of millions of dollars. And then unfortunately, they had to have them hand the money back because they found out that 90% of their customer base were bots and actually weren't people, and the company had been valued based on the customer base. So that's a good example of when you are onboarding people to your business that you want to establish they are real people and real customers as part of that. So, that sort of goes to an e-commerce site or a website that was valued and sold and couldn't prove that their customer base was actually real and genuine. The second part is for individuals, ensuring that our identities are secure and safe, and that we're not going to find ourselves in a circumstance where perhaps an organization is using a less strong and less secure form of identity to authenticate me, and then I get account takeover, which is, financial services, they're going to drain my funds. In other circumstances, they may procure services on my behalf and take the services, and I get charged for that side of things. And I think there's a general myth still at the moment. There's a number of less secure methods that are seen as lower friction to now the modern biometric checks. And the myth there is that they take just as long, they have just as much friction, and they have very little security in that process. And I'm talking about using your Facebook login to get other services, bank credentials to get other services, setting them up in, so-called sort of OAuth structures or either identity exchanges. And really, you're only as good as the gate you've come in on. And if that gate's fairly weak, then you're perpetuating the access to fraud.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, makes sense. Seems like my Gmail is the entry point for nearly everything.
Right.
Do you want a username and password? Or do you want to just click this button? I don't know.
Right.
I guess I'll click the button. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very convenient. So we all have to balance the service with the risk that we take.
Mhm.
In some circumstances, that's fine. I'm looking up the price on a fridge. Okay, I'll use that login. That's okay. Issue with that. But if I'm going to take out a service that's going to have access to my credit card as recurring payments and so forth, yeah, I don't suggest you use those forms of identity.
Well, you've both been over the years also part of some very large negotiations. So let's get into some examples of those because I think it'd be good, as we talk about some of these things, how does this play out? Can we get into some examples of some large scale negotiations and where value has played a part over the years?
Yeah, certainly. Probably more recently, well, it was a good example I think we had back in the Yellowfin days. It's a small one, and then I'll build up to the larger ones. And to me, it sort of set the scene with the team after we'd done the Holden training with the sales and customer success teams. And you alluded to customer success, Brian, in terms of continuing to relay the value to the customers. And I agree it's a very, very important part and a strength of our business too as well. There was an example where a large business rang up and said that they love our technology, love our product. They're coming off a 3-year contract. They only wanted to renew for 1 year and they wanted a 10% discount.
Hmm.
And the customer success manager, young guy, came up to me and said, "What should I do?" And I've found out in the past that many of the contracts had been renewed at 10% discount, which is a quick way to go to business. And I said to him, "So what would they pay if they walked up to us right now?" And he said, "Oh, about 3 or 4 times what they're paying now." And I said, "Well, tell them that price and tell them we'll only put it up 50%, and that if they sign for 3 years." And they signed up because they're like, "Well, hang on, I love this product. I'm not going to pull it out. I've got a cost to change. I just saw what it would cost me if I was to buy it now, and I'm getting that for half the price of what it would be, even though that's 50% more than what I'm currently paying. But we only allow them to do that if they sign up for 3 years." And I recall Lloyd coming back to me and saying, "Oh, God, I can't believe that worked." And I said, "Well, think about it from their point of view, right? They're not going to pull it out. They said they love the product. They know what the price is going to be if they were to, the value they're getting. They're getting that at a 50% discount, which happens to be 50% more than they're getting now." So that sort of set the theme for the customer success team. We had about a 4 to 6% churn rate, 39,000 corporations were using our product. So that was about what you'd expect. And that group were tasked to get 100% in terms of the renewals and revenue. And they were doing 126% because every negotiation they were going in and effectively following that path. So that set the scene for a culture within that group. And then more recently, we had a lovely big negotiation leading up to an event. The event for us was a change in control. So the opportunity to get the deal from the large organization buying from us was finite. So there was an event. The second thing was they were an established customer, but had not embraced the technology with both hands. It certainly fulfilled a need that they had, but they were a data-driven business and it ate into their margins from the data-driven business. But as we pointed out, that with deep fakes and also the latest legislation suggesting that a static database checking of identity credentials was no longer compliant, it needed to be a dynamic environment, which our biometric environment creates, that not only would they be non-compliant, but with deep fakes, they would also see substantial fraud occurring within their customer base. So deep fakes are people using generative AI to generate very, very realistic documentation and also a video like we're doing right now, which is not deep fake, but could be. And only technologies like ours will actually pick that out. So there was a compelling event, time-driven, to get a certain deal within that timeline to commit for multiple years. And also a suggestion that if they didn't change now, that their multi-$100 million line of business was going to evaporate within the next 12 to 24 months. And so once that value was appreciated, we had a robust negotiation that resulted in a multi-year deal with many millions of dollars committed over that term. It was a great deal. It was a win-win on both sides. The first year is very much getting them established, and they get a almost all you can eat sort of in the first year. And then second year, each of the units is monetized, and that's beneficial for us moving forward. So that one was an established relationship, knew the people, knew the partner, knew their products. They had a compelling event and a compelling reason to purchase. And so to me, I think, Brian, when I spoke about this, I felt it was almost the perfect accumulation of all of those points, and certainly very much leveraging all of the Holden learnings.
That's awesome.
Feels like a lot of these scenarios are kind of like, how do you navigate? Think about when people are pushing for a discount or something, how do you kind of reorient towards the relationship style from a contract perspective, from a working perspective? And those multi-year contracts are such a nice way to kind of set that up and set up the relationship to be on a different trajectory, you know?
Yeah. And it's like you say, Josh, the playing field is a lot more level than the buyer would lead you to believe. So like your guys are trying to get a renewal and they're thinking to themselves, gosh, if I lost this account, I would have to fill that hole of all the revenue I got over the last 12 months. And sometimes they don't consider that the buyer, the customer, would have to lose those services that they've been using for the last 12 months or longer. We've seen that plenty of times with our clients where a lot of times we'll be coaching on a particular deal and working with really some of the world's biggest retailers. And they will play hardball of like just what you said. Okay, great. Let's do this thing. We need you to reduce your price 10% and we'll renew. And there was a lot of not only the revenue they were concerned about, but the logo. It was a recognizable logo. They were afraid about losing that as well. And it was a sales leader, one of the folks that we had trained on Backbone, and he went in and he said, "Hey, look, if we don't come to an agreement in this period of time, we're going to pull our services." And they're like, "Well, you can't do that." And he said, "Well, basically watch me." It was a little bit nicer than that, but like, watch me. And what happened was this conversation with the middle manager procurement guy was immediately elevated to the senior vice president of whatever. And the tone of the conversation absolutely changed. And it not only went from, hey, I'm not going to give you a 10% discount to why don't we have a broader conversation? Maybe we can bring in some more products and services. You guys will pay us more, but you get a ton more value. And I don't think they would have ever gotten to this senior vice president if they hadn't done what they did in terms of the negotiation on the renewal.
We had one circumstance, and certainly when we were early days, smaller business, and the team had said yes to one of the big banks about backporting functionality to a previous version, which is not great software practice. And there were problems. There were bugs. It was incompatible. And this had been going on for a while. And I finally said, guys, we have to stop. And so we had this meeting where they basically said, guys, you have to upgrade. We need to stop doing this. You need to change. And there was, from the other side was, oh, well, we might go to market. And I said, well, you can go to market, but I don't think that we benefit you because I know we have the best software. The problem is that we haven't implemented it the best way, and we should have said no to you when we said yes. So I'm saying no now, and I'm saying let's upgrade you to how it should all work, and let's change it to this configuration, and that's how best practice works. We did. It works beautifully. They're now one of our best customers and one of our biggest customers. But there was that tipping point of, had to say no, you need to move to the next version. We're not going to fix the old stuff because it's not best practice. And you're not going to go to market because we're the best in town. So let's move on.
Yeah. And what I love with what you just did there, Josh, is you talk to that other senior leader like they were your peer. They are your peer. So it's appropriate that you do that. But I can just see it right now. Your tone, your body language is like, look, we can't keep doing what we're doing. It got dorked up. Get it. We're going to fix it. and then we're going to go give you the best in class, and you're going to pay us for what it's worth. And it's that matter of fact exchange that I think sometimes gets lost, that our salespeople, and certainly this was me, many times, is like, oh man, I can't lose a deal, and I got to do everything I can, and customer comes first, and I got to just help out the customer and whatever they ask for. And I find that when you act like a peer, and even if that's your account executive, account manager, whatever, but you act like a peer to that decision maker, it changes the conversation, just like you did in that example you gave, and it changes the whole tone of the conversation.
We've seen recently a number of customers do the, if you don't give us a better something, we're going to RFP. And it causes a wobble with the sales guys that sort of come back to deal desk and, they're going to go RFP. And you sort of say, well, look, that's going to cost them a lot of time and effort. They're not going to find a better product or service. And that's a good thing when you've got strength in that side of things. But, you should be confident with that. And there's a cost to change as well. They've invested a substantial amount. We are a product that you embed into your services and into your platform. So it's not something that you change out quickly. With that comes a massive responsibility on our side to maintain it and ensure that it's best of breed functioning and so forth. But that's our job to do. So, we set our teams up for success by doing that. But they do and should have the confidence that an RFP, one, we're not scared of an RFP, so I'm happy to call the bluff. And if they do an RFP, fine, through it. But I do think that that's one where we'd say, I don't think you're going to go RFP, but let's work something else out.
Yeah, we spend a lot of time thinking about our own costs when we price things. I don't think we spend enough time talking about the switching cost for the customer, because that's part of this equation too.
We have a process for some of our larger customers where it's one thing to do the implementation. It's the other thing to operationalize our product within their business. And we're sort of fairly leading edge in some circumstances. And the compliance teams need to be brought on the journey. And that's a really important stakeholder in this circumstance. And there's a long history of all forms of identity compliance, the old 100-point data check, have I got an A document, B document, C document, and the combination meets the identity criteria. Today, that just means you can match documents against a database. Doesn't mean you prove that the person's who they say they are, but they're still wedded to that type of compliance. So very important to bring the compliance team on the journey so they can understand how the technology works and that they can have confidence that it's going to meet the identity requirements and legislation. And then it's also a matter of bringing the operational teams on the journey. How do I ingest and use this new technology? How does the fraud department, when one's flagged and sent through the fraud department, what do they need to do? What's the next action? As we know, fraud prevention, you're not making a decision on it being flagged and then you do further checks, right?
Right.
So they need to know how to do that. So understanding how to operationalize within the business. Now, the reason I bring that up is that's a lot of effort on both parties' side. We're now part of their processes as well as their technology stack. That's not something that's going to be unwound quickly.
Exactly. That's a great point.
Yeah. So as you're working with teams, you mentioned earlier, you were talking about kind of the culture that you're creating. So take us through, you start working with a new sales team, you pick up on some discounting, there's some leakage in different places. Like, how do you prioritize getting these people confident? How do you start to right the ship when things are, I'm not saying that they ever were at any of the companies you've ever worked for, but just kind of take us through your process. What are you looking for? How do you prioritize things?
Yeah, I think firstly, understanding scale-up business, the nature of a scale-up business. And there's an initial evolution within the sales team, which is needed, but not sustainable. And that is get deals at all costs. So get those logos. And it's a very tactical process. And there's a certain type of sales team that are able to do that. And I respect what they do. It's really hard. You are cold calling, you're knocking on doors. People don't know who you are. But very quickly, you need to evolve that into a more robust, because those contracts aren't sustainable. You need to move them into a different space. And so you have that tipping point, and that's where I sort of came in. We had some great logos, but the contracts weren't necessarily robust, and the renewals needed to be, financially viable. You also needed to get that culture out of that early stage of deals at all costs. So we introduced things like the deal desk. We introduced pricing structures and strategies such that they were around give gets. So if you want a discount, I want a multi-year term. If you want a discount, I want you to commit to minimum volumes per annum on a multi-year term. You don't get a discount just because in those circumstances. So I introduced to the teams, and certainly in IDverse, Shane is the Chief Revenue Officer, and he and I were very aligned on this side of things. So he and I run the deal desk with the CEO, and this is the approach that we took into this. But I designed the pricing strategy and the pricing books such that everything was a lever. So anytime someone wanted something, there was something that we got back, and we very quickly introduced the language of give get through the business. I did that when I had John, the CEO, parroting that back to me. I knew that I'd got that as a cultural change within the business. Very quickly in the APAC teams, they were using it effectively. Colin, who's been one of our best salespeople for a long time, there was a deal with one of the large auto finance groups, and he used it so effectively. He not only got a multi-year deal, but he got them to pay all 5 years up front. So he pulled all the levers, which was great. So well done to him, but that was an excellent deal. But so they've got into that understanding that if they're going to ask for discounts, then the customer needs to be giving us something in return. And that's pervaded through all of our contracts, that's pervaded through all of our partnership agreements in that circumstance. And they appreciate that they don't get caught at that dead end where they're giving away price and not getting anything in return for the value, right? So it's all about maintaining the value in our product. And value for us over the time has been things like cash flow, which is very important for scale-up businesses. So for a lever for us, we're willing to give you a discount if you pay us up front, or we're willing to give you a discount if you commit to multi-year deals, because that committed ARR for us. And in a software company, up for investment or sale, ARR, multi-year ARR is the value of the business, and we want to get a multiplier. So all of the pricing levers are around establishing longer term contracts with committed revenues, and in return, we would set up discounts.
Yeah. Tracy, just to summarize what I heard Josh just say, is there's two super important things here. Number one is the attitude, Josh, that you bring to this is we are going to keep price and value aligned. I have your back. This is how we want to go do this. Not you tell them to do it and then, say, what are you doing? We need this deal. Do whatever you need to close it. You stay consistent. So I think that leader attitude is super critical. And then the other thing, which I love, is that you gave them a vehicle to keep price and value aligned. You help them set up the give gets, because it's one thing to say, hey, if you're going to give something, make sure you get something. But the average seller doesn't know. They don't, should I be giving a discount for a 3-year deal? Should I be, what do you want me to trade off, and what is it worth? And by you setting that up, now they have the ground rules to go do like your best guy there, where he's saying, I'm getting 5 years, I'm getting it up front, I'm doing these things, because he's got a very clear understanding of what matters to you and your business.
Do you think, this is for both of you, do you think there are like core beliefs that change as you're on this journey? Because one of the things that you had said earlier, Josh, was like close the deal at all costs as kind of like an old frame of thinking. Do you think there are other things that you picked up on that changed as people start to use give gets more and they work more towards value alignment? Have you seen other things in your travels here?
Yeah, look, the get the deal at all costs is really early days. It's your incubation sort of stage. It was pre-B, Series B funding. You've been scrappy for survival, and I appreciate, as I think I said, I appreciate that mode, but it's not sustainable.
Mm-hmm.
when we set the trajectory of Series C funding and the need to get the funding, which was still ARR driven and particularly committed ARR, and communicating that transparently to the teams, and then also being able to communicate that. So everyone has levels of delegation that they can do from the sales managers and the account execs, but when it goes outside that realm, it needs to come back to the deal desk. But what we do, certainly with the deal desk, is we talk through, once we've talked amongst ourselves, we talk through the logic of our decisions, because I see that as a really important training ground for the sales team. They appreciate that. And I also know, having been in sales and an account exec in past lives, if you did that deal that way, then I wouldn't go, oh, well, that worked, I'll go mirror it. And there's a lot of mirroring occurring in sales teams, sometimes positive, sometimes negative. Like you might say that's a one-off deal for that logo, and next you see that deal pop up in another one. You're like, no, that was a one-off, guys. You can't repeat that. So it's very important to keep control on that. But it's a great opportunity to train them and also be transparent in the logic that you use to come up with the decision. Why we're saying yes to this one and no to a circumstance, or we'll come back and say, we like this, but change that. Get a higher level of commitment in that circumstance for that price, and then that makes sense to us. So I think transparency with the sales teams as to the thought processes that we went through, and they certainly learn from that and use that and apply it on their future deals.
Yeah. Tracy, to add, it has a lot to do with the maturity of the organization, as Josh was saying. I worked for a much smaller company previous to Holden Advisors, and we did a deal with Trek Bicycles with Josh. I know we were talking about cycling earlier, and really wanted the logo, and Trek paid our CEO with a bicycle. So we did the deal for, it was like a high-end 10 grand bike, carbon, all that, but obviously you couldn't do that every time. So you had to grow from there, and when you're clear, like you were saying, this is why we're doing the deal this way, that's super important, because what I find is that deals are almost like legal cases. When there's precedent, that carries the day, right? Like you were saying, they mirror things. There's also a precedent if you are working with the same client. So if you discount deeply one time, boy, it doesn't matter if it's a different country, it doesn't matter. They all talk to each other, and very quickly they're like, wait a minute, you did it for a bicycle last time. We want to do it for a bike this time. And it's like, oh shoot, I just set the bar. So you got to be really thoughtful about that.
Yeah, I think I talked to the team about anchor pricing and how that sets the bar. And there's been a couple of circumstances where, we went in with pricing a while back, and I said, well, you've set the expectation now. They were deals that perhaps didn't go through deal desk, and, salespeople should not be presenting pricing, one, at the wrong time, too early in the cycle, but two, that if they're providing pricing that is not in line with their levels of delegation, then, that's not done. But in some circumstance that's occurred. And then when you explain to them, okay, what you've done is effectively you've anchored the price. So I'm now telling you, you have to go back in at twice price because you didn't have the authority to do that. You've set such a low expectation. You've got a real hard job coming up to turn this around. We had one where we had an established contract at a very low price, but again, it was set at a point in time a couple of years ago when we needed the money at that time. The customer quit that contract because they were having money issues. They then came back to us having revised their business and doing well, but so had we. We'd moved on. Our pricing had substantially gone up, and our circumstances had gone up, and they wanted that old pricing. But we just said, well, no, it doesn't work that way. And we've all moved on. We'll go and build our own one. Okay. We'll see in 6 months when you've spent at least that much money on what you could have paid us for something that we know is not going to function as you need, or we could just get on with it now at the new price. And so ultimately, so Yeah, that anchor pricing can be so detrimental. Yeah.
All right, my next kind of set of questions here, this is my last topic for us, is AI and using data in negotiations, using AI to prep for sales calls. There's so much happening just in what we've heard from clients. And then also I'm curious, Josh, from your team, where have you, like, how do you strike the balance? If people are using AI, there's so much more data available, and yet instinct still plays a big role, intuition still plays a big role in kind of gauging relationships in this way. So how do you balance those two?
Yeah, look, we are an AI company. We use generative AI to build a lot of our technology.
Yep.
One of the key areas that in our biometric engine that we're able to reduce and mitigate substantial bias is because we can train the engine using data sets that are actually generated using AI. We've been doing that for over 8 years. So we have tens and tens and tens of millions of images of people that have been generated using generative AI. So all of the traditional biases you see in many of the other engines, which have been trained on people, therefore the samples are inherently biased. You know, things like different colors, backgrounds, and ethnicities, and so forth. We've been able to really reduce any of that.
Mm.
From a day-to-day utilization, we certainly encourage all of our people to embrace secure access to AI. I certainly use it across my operational area, immense efficiencies in policies and procedures and position descriptions, and they're very logical and structured. Where I see it in the sales process, and one of the examples that I use is there was a particular person in a particular company. This individual was very difficult to get to. They had been very successful in the fintech industry. They perhaps perceived themselves as having sort of a father of the fintech industry in a certain country, and certain thoughts and set in their ways. So I trained one of my AI models all about this person, their background, their behaviors, their interests, you know, all the business they've done, the current opportunities they're working on. And then I trained it on our product and services and our value propositions and our return on investments. And then I got it to run 1,000 simulated sales calls, identifying all of the objections that possibly could come up, and then also went through all the scenarios which we could then mitigate those objections. And ultimately came down to the key opening line with this individual was that our technology enables all people to be included into banking. So it enabled people from all backgrounds, all socioeconomic demographics, all ethnicities, and so forth. The whole point of our company and our business is inclusion. And that's what is his number one thing. He's like, wow, that's amazing. And the rest of the conversation went on, right? So that was a very effective use in that case. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. That's awesome. I can't touch that. So Josh's answer puts everything I would say to shame. All I'll say is that, you know, when we're sellers and sales teams are going out to sell in the age of AI, all the easy answers are already taken. So if your niche is to provide some kind of easy answer or some little tiny thing that you think is going to get your foot in the door, that might have worked 10 years ago. It's not working now. You need to come with thoughtfulness and insight, and taking all of those easy answers and putting it in your noggin to make it make sense for your customer.
I saw a great article from Chris White, who does the demo doctor and some great coaching over in the US. And he gets out the shovel and he says, you know, people aren't buying the shovel. They're buying they don't need a shovel. There's some other reason, like they need to dig a hole. Why do they need to dig a hole? They need to dig a hole to do something else, and so forth. So appreciate it. You know, I'm not selling identity verification because someone just wants to identify someone. There's a whole chain of events within that business that says they need identity service, and that's a means to an end. So appreciating that, then relating your value proposition to ultimately what they're trying to achieve, showing the value of how you're going to enable them to achieve that faster, smarter, better, more efficiently, more productively, and therefore justify the value that they're going to pay for that.
Yeah. It reminds me of, we used to use the 5 whys. I don't know who came up with that, but the 5
Mhm.
whys to find a root cause of a problem. And what you're describing, Josh, is the 5 whys of what your product and service actually achieves. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's smart. Yeah,
Well
that's
said.
great.
Well said. All right, I think that's our episode. Josh, thank you so much. And Brian, thank you both for doing this.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being on, Josh. That was I learned some things. That was a really good use of my time. So thank you.
Thank you. Look,
Really
it's always
appreciate it.
lovely to talk it through, and yeah, I think Holden's a lot for the training courses that we went through at Equifax, and I was fortunate enough, I think, to do your course 3 times and become a coach, and I've always related to it immensely and enjoy our conversations, and I've certainly used it over the last 20 years very effectively.
That's awesome. Thank you for
Good.
that.
All right,
Yeah.
thank you.
Thanks, team.
We'll
Cheers.
see you soon.
All right. See you later.